Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Episode 54, Consciousness equals Self-Reflection? There are basically three ideas of three distinctions one does usually make between beings and how they interact with this world and how they consciously interact with this world. So there's this one where you say, okay, these kinds of beings, they just interact with their surroundings, just like they would do without any thinking about the consequences, basically. So those would be, for example, insects. You would say they just interact with this world. That's the simple way they do it. Then you have another level where you say, okay, these kind of beings, they interact with this world and they react to this world. So you would, for example, say that a dog is on this level. They interact, but they can also react to the environment, to animals and beings around them. Then there's this third layer where you say that these people interact with their environment. They react to their environment, but they also put the influence of their own decisions and own doing into account. So they reflect on themselves, but they reflect on their own actions and put this also into account. And this is what one usually says is what men are, what people are, and what usually many mean to be all of consciousness. That consciousness basically means this third part of including the own interactions into its own account, so to basically do this kind of self-reflection. The question is now, is this really all consciousness is? Is it just this ability to be self-reflective, to reflect on oneself's actions? If that would be true, then experts who say that AI will soon develop their own consciousness, then they might be even right. That might be true then. And it also is assumed that what could help it developing such a consciousness and such self-reflection in machines would be if they would have an own body. So basically if they are robots, if they have an own body with which they can interact with this environment, which is an interesting point that it basically states that the fact that we interact with our environment in a mechanical, physical way, that this is kind of something that helps us develop a consciousness or helps us to come to something like a consciousness in this view. However, the question is if this is everything that amounts to being conscious, to having consciousness, if this is everything that distinguish as humans from other animals and other beings. But if you look closer, then you would see that many things that we would then consider to be conscious actions is something that we humans actually do not consider as conscious actions at all. For example, if you look into driving a car, so everyone can learn to drive a car, and usually most people do, and then that is something that you can learn, but more and more we get to the point where also machines can learn to do this. This is done by machine learning and the artificial intelligence, and there are certain states where you have it. So for example, there are 5 levels that are distinguished in this autonomous driving industry, where you basically have it from level 1, where basically they do not drive autonomically, and then you get to level 2, where there are certain assistance systems that can help you to drive autonomically. For example, that a machine to help you keep a certain speed, then something to keep you distance from the car in front of you, something that allows you to see to change lanes and so on. So small helpers where still you need to be in control of the car, where you still need to be focused on the street and interact with the street and take care of everything. Then there's basically level 3, where you already have some where you can basically look aside at where the car drives in some circumstances on its own. Basically, for example, in a traffic jam, then it drives on its own. But as soon as the car doesn't know what to do, it needs to be able to make an alarm, and you need to immediately be focused again and continue to drive. So this is basically level 3, and then it goes up to level 5, and level 5 would be completely autonomic. So you could basically jump in the car, tell the car where you want to go, and then you could sleep the way until the car has reached its destiny, and you wouldn't even be bothered in any way by your car, and you didn't need to drive. So that's basically the goal where this development is headed to, and it looks like this is really something that is possible, something that these cars can learn by these machine learning methods that have been developed by now, and this is of huge interest, of course, in industry. But so as we have seen, you can learn this, so you can learn driving a car, but oftentimes for us people it is if we drive a car, we do many things at the same time. Maybe we listen to the radio or to a podcast, or we think about something we have to do later and so on. So if you have learned to drive a car and you have driven for some years now, you might be so established that you could say, I'm really not consciously driving anymore. So you drive, and you, of course, you drive correctly. You keep the speed limit and so on. You stop at a traffic light, and you only drive when it's green and so on. But if somebody would ask you later, hey, do you remember this traffic light? Was it really green? And you would say, yeah, well, I cannot really remember it, but sure, it was green because I only drive when it's green. But in some sense, that shows you that you were unconsciously driving, basically. Not unconsciously in the sense that you fainted and you were knocked out or something, but in the sense that you did not really keep track of it. And so a lot of things that we teach our machines to do right now, and that we would consider to be kind of conscious acts for people, we would do not consider them conscious at all. They are tasks where we develop an algorithm basically to do them, where we learn to do it, where we learn to drive. You know what to take care of, when to when to turn to the right, when to turn to the left, when to do this and that. So we learned this, but we as soon as we have these algorithms in our learning basically developed, we consider it as an unconscious thing because we do not really think about it. We do not really need to think about each actions to take. We do not really think about whether to stop at a traffic light or not, because we know if it's red, we need to stop. If it's green, we can drive. So this is basically where we come to, where we do not consider it to be a conscious act, basically, because it's basically running in the background, like some process in the background, and we don't really acknowledge it anymore. Okay, time for a short break. In this break, I just shortly want to mention other products that you can have except for this podcast. So for once, if you want to really learn more about the Sci-Faith podcast, I really recommend to you to get my book, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is available in English as an ebook. You can order it at Amazon. I really encourage you to read it, to get a deeper insight into the ideas behind Sci-Faith, how science and faith can be combined, how they are compatible, and in which way you can find this or combine them to each other. Also, if you like reading novels, especially if you're interested in science fiction, I recommend to you my book Alien Thoughts, which is also about technical topics. Also, these ideas of Sci-Faith are baked into this book, and many other ideas. Basically, the whole story of the gospel is told in a way in a science fiction story. So if you are interested in this, I really recommend it to you. This is also available as an ebook, also in English. And I also have, if you are familiar with the German language, I also have a new crime novel. It's called the Odysseus-Liste, where it is about basically a murder that needs to be, or it looks like a suicide, and it needs to be resolved. And there are many also interesting points in it about open source technology and so on. And also it has this idea behind Sci-Faith that you also find in my book, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith. It's also in there. So I'm always, when I'm writing these books without this intention of putting these ideas into it, I'm always astonished that later I find that they still are in this, because those are basic principles, and I think it's interesting how they come up basically everywhere in every story and so on. And if you are interested in this, it's a pretty short book. You need to be able to read German, of course. It's only 75 pages or something, so it's a quick read, but it's also really exciting and a really nice story, I think. And this you can also order at Thalia. And I'm looking into, maybe I can do an English version of this. I see what I can do. And if so, then I will announce it as soon as it is possible. Maybe also the books I mentioned right now, except for the last one, they are only available as ebooks. Maybe I will convert them into a print version that you can also get a print version of this. If you would be interested in this, if you say, I really would like to read those books, but I only read print versions, then let me know. Then I know there is a demand for that, and then I will try to put more effort into this endeavor. And if you have any kind of feedback to my books, or want to write a review, or want to get in touch with me, and you can always use the contact form at my webpage, sci-faith.de/en. I really like to hear from you and get any feedback from you, and also ideas for new podcast episodes and so feel free to contact me at any time. Many things that the machines are learning today are things that we would say are things that for us run in the background, where we are not saying that is conscious actions of us. And therefore, the question is this really consciousness? If we ourselves would consider such things not as conscious, how can we then say for machines that this is consciousness? And for example, if you would also look at things like ChatGPT, if you ask it a question, some answer will come out. But on the other side, if you are an expert on some field and somebody asks you this question, you could maybe even answer it directly without thinking about it. If I ask you the area of a circle and you have learned it in maths and you have learned it again and again, you will immediately know it's PR squared. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to make a conscious investigation into a circle. How could it look like? You don't need to derive something from it, because if you have learned it, you just know it by heart and you can tell it to me immediately. And therefore, this is also something where you would say this is unconscious, something that you kind of do unconsciously. Of course, if it's something where you don't know anything about and I ask you about it, then you have to think about it. You have to develop some algorithms or some way of thinking about it and to come to a solution. But as soon as you have come to the solution and it is established in your mind, then when I ask you the next time, it will be just as quickly and as unconsciously as if you are an expert on this field. So therefore, as you see already here, it's the same way that something that we might consider like traces of a consciousness in machines, we would not consider as something of real consciousness in ourselves. And therefore, the question is, what really is then consciousness? Or is really being able to self-reflect and so on, is this really already consciousness, or is there more to it? And I think even if we look at AIs, we know from, for example, ChatGPT, it's all about the prompts. You need to prompt these AIs correctly to get the results you want, and to find a smart prompt is basically the new challenge to get good results. But those AIs, they only react to a prompt. They don't think of themselves. They don't think around. They just, if you give them a prompt, they try to find out what they can tell you is the solution. And for us, this is of course not the case. We if somebody prompts us basically by asking us a question or something, of course we are basically prompted, we think about it, and we provide an answer as good as we can. However, that's not the only thing we do. We also basically prompt ourselves. We think for ourselves about issues in our lives, or about things we want to think about that interest us, and so on. So this might be some kind of what you would call self-reflections, this kind of self-prompting, but there still is the question, is that all there is? And even to this prompting, are we really prompting ourselves, or is something prompting us? Is there maybe some quantity involved that prompts our thinking, that gives us ideas, gives us something to think about? Because especially if you think about ideas, how ideas come to you, if you experience that sometimes, oftentimes they just come out of the blue. It's really rarely the case that you get an idea by really consistently thinking of it. Oftentimes that's even a blockade. Oftentimes it's if you have an issue to solve and you think about it, oftentimes the greatest help is to just leave it be, don't think about it anymore, and then after some time, when you have lost track of the thought, you get a new idea, you get a new thought, and this is then oftentimes the solution to the problem that you had, and so on. So ideas are oftentimes just coming to us out of the blue, and you really need to ask, is this then has this to do something with only self-reflection, or is there more to it? And I think, of course, you cannot prove it in the one way or the other, but I think there is more to it. I think there is more than just self-reflection to our consciousness, and I think that that we are created as not only material beings, not only as beings with a brain and a soul, but also beings with a spirit. And I think that the spirit prompts us to also think about certain things. And I think with this spirit, God wants also to get in contact with us, so that he can prompt us with his ideas, with his with his being, with his communication, and this is I think what also life is about, to get in contact with our Creator and to get into fellowship with him, and by this receive also new thoughts that we have not thought of before. And I think that's basically the source also of what we would call consciousness, and but that's basically where I think consciousness comes from, and therefore I think that AI itself cannot achieve such a state of consciousness. And if you just also look at the current AI tools, for example, also ChatGPT and so on, what they do is they mimic basically what we humans can do. They basically mimic it. They try to reproduce it by acting like it, but they do not really think in this way. So if you ask an AI and large language model, for example, if you ask some question, then it will just search through the web and try to find solutions for this problem, but it will not question them. It will don't do any thinking as we would thinking of it, but it would try to do it in a way that you that it thinks, or that you think that makes you think that it would think like you do, but it doesn't, and it just mimics the way we are thinking. And I think this is also important to understand. I think AIs will only be able to maybe closely mimic what we are doing, closely mimic how we behave, but I think it will never come to the point where it really behaves like we would, where it thinks in the same way we would do, because it cannot achieve this state of consciousness, because this state of consciousness is not a mechanical just a machinist way of thinking. It's also a spiritual and a way, and it goes beyond this realm of just material, or beyond this materialistic realm into the spiritual realm, and therefore I think this will not be possible, and therefore I think consciousness, there's always something deeper going on, and every time some machine looks like it's getting conscious, or you might think, oh, that's looks like a real human being to some degree, I think you need to always remember that it's basically just mimicking human traits, and to really get to the bottom is only possible of human thinking and of human consciousness. This is only possible if there's also a spiritual component added to it. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there, or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the block. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast, and then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that. And now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.